Hi, welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and thanks for watching. Well, the legislature is closing in on the end of the year budget. We think that and more after these words.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Hi, welcome back to the program. Well, we're going to take this program today and we're going to chat a little bit about the state budget. It's June. It's the biggest month of the 12 months for state government. It's the month in which the state legislature is supposed to do the budget. In addition to this year, Governor Rendell's expansive and aggressive second-term agenda is on the table. Joining me, as often is the case, a trio of folks who know a lot more about the legislature than I'll ever know. Sitting across from me is Gene Barr. He is a vice president with the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry. And I always give me your other full title. Come on.
Vice President, Government and Public Affairs. How's that sound?
I always leave. That's pretty official. Jim Redmond, he's the senior vice president with the Hospital and Healthsystem Association. It only took me 5 years to get that right straight. And then here to my right is friend Anton. He's the president and CEO of the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. I got that right, didn't I?
Yes, you did.
All right, look. Here we go again. It's like, as Ronald Reagan used to say, here we go again. We're now into these intense discussions. Gene, let me start with you. Are they going to do this budget on time?
Well, I mean, that's always the big question. For this is the sixth year during this administration. 5 years it's been late. I guess one of the things when I get asked that, typically if someone tells you they know when it's going to get done, they have no clue. Because really nobody does. Because we go through this, there's things that we think going in are going to be on the list, and the list gets added to and subtracted this time of year almost on a daily basis. So we really don't know what's out there.
Fred, let me ask you this question. There's a surplus in the budget, though it's diminished this year because of the revenue collections. The business community, and I didn't ask Gene this, he can jump in on this if he wants, clamoring for business tax cuts. What do you think is the situation as it unfolds as we sit here, sort of the middle of June?
Well, I think that we need business tax cuts. We really do. The Rendell approach to economic development has been to make grants to individual companies for various capital programs. I would characterize his approach as granting incentives. The business community as a whole believes we need a climate that's on a broad base attractive to business. Now, there are two major proposals which we in the business community have. One is to change the way the capital stock or the corporate net income tax is computed to make it 100% a single sales factor. That means to make the corporate net income tax calculated on sales rather than on payroll or property within the state. That would be very beneficial. The other is the phase out of a cap on the net operating loss carry forward. Now, both of those proposals, the Pennsylvania State Senate, the leadership has endorsed proposals in both those areas.
What is Governor Rendell saying?
Governor Rendell is saying that he is willing to negotiate on that. Now, let me say this. This is very important. This is the point. Both of those, my calculation is if we got both of those business tax reforms, it's worth about $50 million a year. He's talking about all sorts of programs that he wants that are 450, 650. His education program is $2 billion.
Jim, let me ask you this question about the environment. All of this takes place in a particular environment where Republicans, control the Senate, Democrats control the House. What's the environment that you see at the moment in terms of the relationship? You're a long-time observer and participant in legislative activities. What's the dynamic at work?
Well, I think there are two things to point out, Terry. First of all, this is an election year with all 203 members of the House up for re-election. a lot at stake, a presidential election year, big turnout expected. The second thing is that actually Pennsylvania's fiscal health is a lot better than so many other states. So that's a positive thing for Pennsylvania. And the key is going to be trying to come together and wrestle with all of the priorities that the governor has laid out.
Now, Gene, the governor has taken most of his second-term agenda, as in my opening, thrown it into the hopper and said, these are the 3 or 4 things I must have. That complicates just getting the simple, but not a simple thing, but getting the budget done with not arguably a surplus, as both Fred and Jim point out. Go ahead.
Correct. And it's exactly right, and that's typically what's done. I mean, you throw in some issues, and some of these issues have been hanging around for 18 months.
Yeah.
I mean, the energy has certainly been there for a while, but it certainly does. The governor believes this is his time to get some of his issues. He ties them in with the budget, and it gets into, I'll be happy to do this if you do that. As Fred said, we are kind of optimistic that we're going to get some things that will help us on the business side. As Fred pointed out, there are 2 things. One that actually penalizes companies for hiring Pennsylvanians, the way that it's calculated, and the other is penalizes startup and cyclical companies. We've got to change those.
But let me weigh in on that. These items that Ed Rendell wants are extra core budget issues. And now I understand in the meeting on June 3rd at the governor's mansion that they took off the sale of the turnpike until the end of September.
Yeah,
now that's one major item. But these items, education spending, healthcare spending, they're
still on the table.
But they're extra.
We're going to take that up. Fred brings a good point up. We're going to take those up after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Pennsylvania Medical Society, doctors and patients, preserve the relationship. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association, business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Welcome back to the program with Gene Barr, Fred Anton, and Jim Redmond. We're talking about the impending passage of the budget, if we're not a little too optimistic. Jim Redmond, and I'm going to put you guys on the spot. You can duck the question if you want. I'll let you duck it. About a month now, they'll meet, maybe into early July. Then they'll go, the legislature we're talking about will adjourn, and they'll come back for a month in September, and then there'll be no lame duck session, none of that stuff after the election. They're going to meet about 8 weeks in 6 months. Governor Rendell has called them, in the past, the part-time legislator. What do you think about that? A part-time legislature. What do you think about that?
I don't think it's terribly unique. What's critical is the preparation for when they are in session in terms of moving particular pieces of legislation through. I mean, the legislative process, as we all know, just doesn't occur when they vote.
Yeah.
It's all preparation, and the work that goes into preparing bills to be considered is as important as the actual vote.
Do you agree with that, or do you think there is some...
To a certain degree. I've worked in my life about 9 or 10 states, and every state's a little bit different.
Yeah.
Most states I've worked have been in the South, and they do meet much more infrequently. As Jim said, there are other things, be it constituent service, be it hearings, committee meetings, and so forth. So you really have 2 issues. One, is it necessary for the legislature to meet on a very regular basis in order to pass things? I mean, we would argue that a lot of things that get passed we don't like. On the second piece is the compensation appropriate to attract the kind of people you want into that position? Those are really 2 different questions.
Terry?
Go ahead.
I think probably the smallest part of the rank and file House member is passing legislation. Mm-hmm. Far more important is his interacting with his constituents, constituent service, and fundraising. I mean, if you talk to these legislators about getting elected, they are going door to door if they're in a competitive race. Mm-hmm. And that's the only way they can win, if they've got a competitive race. So they're focused on their constituents, getting to know them personally, rather than on legislation. Now, not only that, and I fear it's happening this time, what has happened in major legislation is it gets amended a few days before. People don't even know what is in some of these major bills.
Weren't some of those reforms
Some of the
that
reforms
they passed
were done on that particular reason, particularly in the House for second and third consideration
But
issues.
Fred brings up a good point about, you know, they don't seem to meet for long periods of time, and then all these changes are dropped in. And it's true, they may have a little more time to pass them now, but there's not a lot of time. But see, I guess most of you folks are so cued into this. I mean, you pay attention to this daily, but I guess the average citizen, the reformers have made a big deal of this, no, Jim?
Oh, big deal. In fact, some of the reforms that the House adopted actually slows down the process and makes it far more difficult to get some things done.
Yeah, I mean, I would argue that, you know, last year was the first year these reforms were in. I mean, it's I think, fair to argue that ending at 11 o'clock, and I understand the rationale for that, actually added probably 5, 6, 7, 8 days onto last year's budget, because it's kind of like getting the snowball rolling. You start that thing going 10:30 at night.
If they hadn't voted for the pay hike at 2 a.m. in the morning, am I right? We probably wouldn't be.
That's what led us to a lot of this.
Right now, the Republicans in the House are complaining that the budget has not been brought out onto the floor, so the rank and file members have a chance to debate the budget. The same closed leadership process of resolving the budget, rather than participation by the rank and file, is occurring right here. Where is the reform? Where is the reform?
You know, the issue for it seems it gets brought up time and time again. It's not that they don't work hard. I mean, I think everybody would admit, as Fred points out, when they're not in this formal session, they're doing constituent work, they're out, you know, they probably work 65, 70 hours a week.
Absolutely.
The question is, what should they be doing now? Both of you seem fairly comfortable with the current process. Jim? No?
Well, I think I'm still getting used to it and trying to figure it out. And you know, particularly in the House, where you've got a one-vote majority, I don't care if you're Republican or Democrat, when you got that slim a majority, it's tough to govern.
Right.
And a diverse state like Pennsylvania, there are a lot of diverse views and issues that kind of want to get through the legislative funnel.
It is a big, diverse state, and that does make it difficult.
Well, you know, as Jim said, and that's exactly what I was thinking. I mean, we're talking about some really complex issues. I mean, you know, Jim does health care, we do a lot of the business stuff, but these folks are doing everything with health care, business taxes, various business issues, health and welfare issues, transportation, and trying to wrap your arms around all those and understand them.
And you mean like at least the turnpike proposal that you'd have to carry in, right, Fred? It'd be about a foot high.
Issues are not getting any less complex, and it's tough. You know, as I've said to people, it's not a job I would want. It's a lot of hours. It's living in a fishbowl.
Well, I don't.
Public service, you know, is a tough deal.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the issue is you know, more transparency, and Fred makes this point that we do have a leadership-driven General Assembly. I mean, chairmen of committees used to be far more powerful, I think, maybe than they are now, and tends to be all sort of leadership-driven. Rank and file don't have nearly. I mean, they were talking about giving every member a chance to at least get a piece of legislation up for a vote. I mean, and Jim, you're smiling. You think that's not likely to ever happen, right?
No, I mean, there's just not enough days to allow 203 members to do that.
All right, when we come back, I want to get into some of the substance of what they might do. The energy package, you all agree, or they're closer to that than anything else, Fred? Everybody agrees to that?
Seems to be.
All right, let's talk a little bit about that and a couple of other substantive items when we return after this break.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the State System of Higher Education. 14 state-owned universities. The state system is the largest provider of higher education in Pennsylvania. And by the Hospital and Healthsystem Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Hi, welcome back to the program. We're talking about the impending passage of the budget. We hope, I think everybody hopes by June 30, the Constitution. Actually, that's a state law, right? The state law deadline. I almost said constitutional. I don't think that's correct. All right. Of all the issues that they're debating, and I want to get Jim in here on health care in a moment, they seem closer on this energy package. Fred,
well, the Senate has passed an energy package, and I think the denominated dollar amount is $650,000, and it's over $650 million over a extended period of time. The governor wants $850 million over a much shorter period of time. So the House Republicans or House Democrats or Senate Republicans and the Senate generally has agreed that an energy package is necessary. It's a question of negotiating with the governor.
You agree with that?
Yes, that's what it seems to be. And of course, there are different wrinkles in that as well. The governor has proposed borrowing $850 million.
Right.
The Senate is, some of it's borrowing, some of it's paid for out of current revenues. Now, those revenues, interestingly enough, are some of the gross receipts taxes that the state believes are going to see a windfall in with caps coming off electricity prices and therefore greater gross receipts taxes. Now, you've got certain Republicans who say, well, let's cut the gross receipts tax and give people a break. So that debate is still ongoing, although I think that they're coming much closer to a final package.
Yeah, I mean, the 4 years, I guess the governor wanted
he wanted
850,
3, I think,
yeah, 3 or 4, and the Senate, I think, is 10.
It's like 10 years, $650 million over 10.
But in other words, you think they're close to a deal,
I think they're working through that, massaging the details.
And that should not hold up the budget. You agree, Fred?
It should not.
That should not hold up the budget. All right, Jim Redmond, I'll turn to something that might, be more problematic, and that's the governor's plan to cover health care. I mean, we have about 800,000 people without coverage, health care coverage. He wants to cover 250,000. Where does that, by rating the M-Care fund, where does all that stand?
Well, the bill currently stands back in the Senate. It was passed by the House. The House passed sort of a modified program that the governor offered, and that's pending before the Senate. My understanding, according to the majority leader, Senate Republicans are going to announce soon their health care plan. So it's hard to see these things getting done on health care issues by the end of this month.
All right, so we got health care perhaps not done, energy likely.
Probably done.
Let's go to the massive proposal to lease the Pennsylvania Turnpike. Fred, the consensus seems that there's no way that gets done in the next 15, 20, 25 days. You agree with that?
I don't think it gets done at all.
At all?
At all. I think the current proposal is a non-starter. The amount of money that would be generated by the lease is far lower at $12 billion and perhaps reduced further by paying off some borrowing than was originally proposed. And the revenue that the governor estimated would be produced with a projected 12% return. People are, quite frankly, dismissive of the idea of a 12% return. Where he got that, who knows? But I don't think it will go.
I want to run to a break, but I want to stay on this subject, Gene. When we come back, I want to. Republicans seem more supportive of this in general than Democrats. I talked with this last week with a trio of journalists who agreed in their interviews. But we'll take a quick break and we'll come back. We're going to pursue this. This is a huge topic. It involves, roads and bridges, mass transit, something that we've not touched on. We'll chat about that and more following these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. Have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Penn Future, where we believe that every environmental victory grows the economy, and by the Pennsylvania Cyber Charter School, bringing educational innovation and freedom to the children of Pennsylvania.
Hi, welcome back to the program. We're chatting about a number of big issues that are before the Pennsylvania legislature. Gene Barr, let me start with you on this, or actually we'll continue with what we were talking about with Fred. Republicans in general seem to be more favorable towards this leasing the turnpike than Democrats,
Yeah.
what
kind of, I think if you look at it philosophically, if you believe Republicans certainly favor more of the free market, then these public-private partnerships certainly fall more into what a Republican would say. Although it's interesting that the reaction didn't break cleanly across R versus D lines. Clearly, we need more money into infrastructure. It's not going to be painless whether you do it at the pump, which is actually a user-type tax, and that money goes into the roads. But clearly we need to do something, and if you look at what the governor's proposed, he's proposed some borrowing for infrastructure, which if you look at it from our perspective, that is the appropriate role for government to play in terms of borrowing, to borrow for infrastructure. We have some concerns over the borrowing for other things, but this is a place we believe that state government ought to play the role.
Yeah. Well, you've got this, I mean, Fred, and then I want to turn to Jim to close the show on what additional health care issues. There can be no doubt that there's a serious infrastructure problem that the business community is vividly aware of.
The one item where emergency action is definitely required is fixing roads and bridges.
And how about mass transit?
Well, mass transit has already been taken care of. There was a huge subsidy to SEPTA in Philadelphia, and there's permanent funding in Act 44. Now, don't forget,
we already have a plan in place.
Is already in place, and as a matter of fact, a lot of borrowing can be done under Act 44, and as I understand Act 44, it's severable. So even if they don't get the tolling for I-80, the Turnpike Commission can borrow money under Act 44 and use it outside the toll road to fix.
I didn't realize that. That's a great point.
And $4 gallon gasoline should drive people to mass transit.
Yeah, there you go. Other than M-Care, the health care agenda?
Well, it looks like agreement has been struck on the prohibition on smoking in public places, and that should be enacted fairly soon by the legislature and signed by the governor.
Right. All right, look, I want to thank you. We'll have you back at some point and pick this up. Maybe in July we'll do a little assessment of what they did or what they didn't do. Final question, do they get the budget done, yes or no, by June 30? I'm putting you on the spot.
I don't think so.
No, you don't think so.
Fred,
are you going to be optimistic?
They must get the budget done before the governor's conference, the National Governors Conference, meets in Philadelphia in the middle of July.
So they don't want all that press, right? Fred gets the last word. We'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.